刚才我们对中美关系以及朝鲜半岛等共同关心的重要问题深入交换意见。
Just now we exchanged the views on bilateral relations and important international and regional issues of mutual interest, and we all believe that both sides, the leaders, had very close interactions through emails and phone calls, which gave the great directions to the development of both sides. Right now, the development of both sides in a pivotal position with the 40 years development. I believe there are more and more challenges and opportunities in front of us. But of course, there are the opportunities oversize or weight the differences. I believe we have more opportunities two sides, and I believe this is also fulfilled and in line with our people's aspirations. We will arrange more interactions in the high levels
also
and the local
arrangement
levels.
of high-level exchanges at the top and all the other levels, and also have the second round of dialogues of the four mechanisms this year to expand exchanges and cooperation on economy, mil-to-mil law enforcement, drugs, subnational cooperation, and people-to-people exchanges to firm up the public support for China-U.S. relationship. Not too long ago, economic teams had another round of consultation in Beijing, reaching some understanding and consensus. We believe the most important point is that both sides have to use constructive ways to settle our differences. We hope the U.S. will meet the Chinese halfway to use a win-win instead of a lose-lose approach, and use a plus instead of minuses to find appropriate solutions to the problems we face. And we hope that the U.S. will refrain from making any unilateral, non-constructive means or to create further obstacles for our further cooperation. In the course of our discussion, I reaffirmed to the Secretary our principled position on Taiwan, expressed our grave concerns over some of the recent U.S. practices on this, and urging the U.S. side to abide by the One China principle and 3 Sino-U.S. joint communiques, stop official exchanges and all military links with Taiwan, appropriately handle Taiwan-related issues with caution so that the bigger picture of our relationship will not suffer unnecessary disruptions. Secretary Pompeo gave us an update on the Singapore summit. This is a successful and historic meeting, and the significance lies in that it has reincorporated the peninsula issue back to the track of peaceful solution via dialogues. This is a good beginning, and we are greatly appreciative of the courage and vision demonstrated by the leaders of U.S. and the DPRK. This is a good beginning, but of course it is impossible to solve this issue overnight. We hope and believe that the two sides will follow through on the agreement reached at the summit, continue to meet each other halfway, carry out vigorous interaction, and follow through on the following consultation. And this is a process that calls for the participation of all parties. China is ready to work with U.S., the DPRK, and all relevant parties closely to promote dialogue and establish a peace mechanism on the peninsula and make our due contribution to the settlement of the issue. Thank you. Now the floor is to Secretary Pompeo.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be with you, Councilor Wang. It's the second time we've had the chance to meet. First in Washington and now here. And it's great to make my first trip to China as the United States Secretary of State. I want to thank all of our Chinese hosts for their incredible hospitality. I also want to thank China and President Xi for his role in helping bring North Korea to the negotiating table and for its continued support as we work to achieve the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. This is my third country that I've had the chance to speak with today. Each has reinforced 3 important things that happened in Singapore. First, the commitment to a fundamentally changed relationship. Japan, the Republic of Korea, and now China have all acknowledged that we have turned the corner, that we have begun a process away from the threat of war and towards peace on the peninsula. Each of those 3 countries, too, has acknowledged the importance of the work that President Trump has undertaken and the commitments that Chairman Kim has made towards that very end, to achieve that denuclearization. And each of those 3 countries has also acknowledged that it is important that the sanctions regime that is in place today remain in place until such time as that denuclearization is in fact complete. There has been unanimity in that set of objectives and I'm heartened by that following the Singapore summit. The United States wants a very constructive relationship with China. That means we have to make concrete progress on our top priorities. We've seen the power that comes when the United States and China do work together, when we don't treat the relationship as being zero-sum. We're stopping the flow of illegal opioids together, and this will save countless American lives, and we are deeply appreciative of China's support. We discussed trade today. Our deficit with China is still too high. I stress how important it is for President Trump to rectify that situation so that trade becomes more balanced, more reciprocal, and more fair, with the opportunity to have American workers be treated fairly. We had good and constructive discussions. We also need to make some progress between our two countries on security. As Councilor Wang mentioned, I reaffirmed our concern with respect to China's efforts to build and militarize outposts in the South China Sea, endangering the free flow of trade and threaten the sovereignty of other nations and undermining regional stability. I urged Councilor Yang, and he confirmed China's willingness to resolve these disputes in a peaceful way without resort to threats, coercion, or intimidation. I am confident that we can continue to work together towards that end. When our two countries disagree, our two countries will speak up and firmly stand for each of our people. Our values, including the respect for human rights and religious freedom and the rule of law, are important. When we cooperate, the United States and China can make great progress. There is much work ahead for our two countries. I am committed to working with you and with China to achieve those objectives. Thank you.
Thank you. Now the floor is open for questions. Please only ask one question. CCTV. My question goes to State Councilor Wang. You said at the press conference during the two sessions that China and U.S. may have competition but don't have to be rivals and should strive to be partners. That was a clear message to the international community. What do you think the two sides should do to achieve that goal? China and the U.S. are two big countries. It's natural for there to be some competition, which is normal in international relations. What matters is how we approach competition, how we see competition. China's view is that competition with the U.S. should be benign and positive. It is about exceeding one's own limits than replacing each other. We should let competition drive cooperation and produce win-win outcomes through cooperation. Only by so doing will we serve the interests of our two countries and shoulder our obligations to the world. Next year, we will celebrate the 40th anniversary of diplomatic relations, which will be an important juncture in bilateral relationship. China will work with the U.S. to follow through on the important agreements of our presidents, respect each other, focus on cooperation, and manage differences. Like Mr. Secretary said, this is not a zero-sum game. When we cooperate, we can make great progress. We should make 2019 a year characterized by greater mutual trust, broadened exchanges, and deepened cooperation. We need to step up all-round cooperation and unlock and contribute more positive energy to this relationship and contribute more to world peace and development. In the meantime, we also need to respect each other and on that basis properly handle sensitive issues and differences and remove the stumbling blocks in the growth of bilateral relations. At the moment, it is particularly important to step up communication to avoid disturbances. Such efforts will help to increase the impetus and remove obstacles in the growth of bilateral relations that would lay a more solid foundation for the sound and steady growth of bilateral relations in the next 40 years and open up greater prospects. Thank you.
Next question goes to Michael Gordon from the Wall Street Journal. Keep it to one question, if you would, please. Thank you.
Okay. A question for State Councilor Wang. The United States has taken the position that North Korea should take major steps to dismantle its nuclear weapons and forces in a short period of time, in 2.5 years. It also says, as you've just heard, that there should be no sanctions relief until these steps by North Korea have been taken. Will China support this approach? Will China press North Korea to take disarmament steps in the next 2 years, and will it pledge to withhold any sanctions relief until these steps by North Korea are carried out?
这个问题其实，应该由国务卿先生来回答。
Actually, Mr. Secretary is in a better position to answer this question because he just had very in-depth and detailed communication with the DPRK side. About China's position, I believe that we all know it very clearly. That is a firm commitment to denuclearization. At the same time, we believe that it is important to address the legitimate concerns of security of the DPRK, that is, a peace mechanism on the Korean Peninsula. We believe that all the parties, including China, the DPRK, and the United States, are agreed on that goal. That is also part of the joint statement signed by the two leaders themselves. That is the most important provision of that joint statement. As to how denuclearization will proceed, its modalities and steps, just as Secretary Pompeo said, that will be worked out through more detailed and specific consultations going forward. And China stands ready to play its constructive role in that process. Thank you.
May I add to that? State Councilor Wang and I had a good constructive discussion on these very topics. With respect to the pace at which the denuclearization will take place, I think we both agree that we need to do it as timely fashion as is possible to achieve the outcomes, and that the security assurances that we've talked about are provided at times that are appropriate. We also talked at some length about the sanctions. China has reaffirmed its commitment to honoring the UN Security Council resolutions. Those have mechanisms for relief contained in them, and we agreed that at the appropriate time that those would be considered. But we have made very clear that the sanctions and the economic relief that North Korea will receive will only happen after the full denuclearization, the complete denuclearization of North Korea.
谢谢。下一个问题，凤凰卫视记者。
Mr. Secretary, I'm from Phoenix TV. You said that China and U.S. should have a results-oriented relationship. It's not a zero-sum relationship, and both sides should have success together. What will the U.S. do specifically towards that end? Thank you.
So there are many ways that we'll achieve that. Among the most important of them is we continue sound strategic dialogue between our two nations, so that where there are places where we disagree, we iron out those differences, and that we express our interests very clearly and work towards the peaceful resolution of those conflicts. Make very clear. There are many things today where China and the United States work very closely together that improve the lives for the citizens of each of our two countries. I mentioned a couple of them in my opening remarks. We'll continue to work alongside of those, on each of those. There are many, many places where our two nations are far better off working together in concert and aligned, as opposed to working at interests that diverge. And I am committed to working with Councilor Wang to achieve those in every venue where our two nations operate.
Our final question goes to Rich Edson from Fox News.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, how confident is the United States that it knows the extent of the North Korean nuclear program, and how confident are you in North Korea's willingness to divulge that information? And to both of you, Mr. Foreign Minister, Mr. Secretary, did you discuss the suspected attacks on American diplomats here, and have you learned any new information regarding what could be causing them?
So let me answer each of those two questions. I'll take your second question first. The issue with respect to the American Foreign Service officer who suffered a health incident here was raised. I asked the Chinese to continue to cooperate with us to try and figure out how that happened, how it came to be, and to work with us to conduct an investigation sufficient that we can prevent it from happening again. I raised the issue, and Councilor Wang was kind in saying that he has provided and will continue to provide full support to ensuring that Americans serving here as diplomats will continue to be safe and secure, and I thank him very much for that. With respect to the scope and scale of the North Korea nuclear program, I don't want to get into the details of our intelligence precisely, but we have a reasonable understanding. It is incredibly important that we get a full understanding of that as quickly as possible, and as part of the efforts that will be undertaken in the week and weeks ahead, we will work with the North Koreans to come to have a fuller understanding of that, so that we can begin to execute together the commitments that President Trump and Chairman Kim made. They made real commitments to denuclearize, each of them. And President Trump made a commitment that he would provide security assurances that were commensurate with that. Those are firm commitments that the two leaders made, and an understanding of the program as a piece of what will ultimately lead to our capacity to verify that full and complete denuclearization has actually taken place.
On the so-called sonic attack, we've been staying in communication between our two sides. Just now, Mr. Secretary mentioned that China has all along and will continue to protect the lawful rights and interests of all diplomats in China, including those from the U.S., in accordance with law. We have done some serious investigation. What I can tell you is that we haven't found any cause or lead that have triggered such a condition. We will stay in communication with the U.S. to properly handle this issue. And also on trade, Mr. Secretary mentioned trade. We have two options. One is cooperation and win-win outcomes. Second, confrontation and a lose-lose scenario. China opts for the first one and has made such a decision. We hope the U.S. will also make a wise choice, and China, on its part, is prepared on all fronts. Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, that was the joint press conference held by State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, as well as U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The two held talks on U.S.-China relations and also talked about the Korean Peninsula issue. Wang Yi emphasized China's view that joint consultation should come first when managing the differences between the two countries rather than taking unilateral actions. And Pompeo responded by saying the two had some good, constructive talks. Let's now unpack what's been said. Let me bring in my guest, Mr. Rong Ying. So what stood out to you the